Welcome again to my channel on YouTube and as a podcast about yoga and Ayurveda and all related topics, and your personal channel to your questions. I'm always curious. So according to the recent questions on the Kleshas, I will be continuing now with Raga, and I would like you to like and subscribe and press the bell so we can inform you when a new video is going to be released. I'm curious on your feedback, so please let us know in the comments and what else you'd like to work with me. So we're coming to Raga. Attachment, novelty, and the subtle addiction to pleasure. When Patanjali defines Raga in Yoga Sutra 2.7, he does so with a precision that leaves no room for moralism and no room for sentimentality. He says, attachment is that which follows pleasure. That is all he says. He does not define attachment as marriage. He does not define it as commitment. He does not define it as loving too much. He defined it as a movement of the mind that follows pleasure. The Sanskrit is exact, anusyayi, meaning resting upon, following after, lying in the wake of. Sukha is pleasure, ease, and delight. Attachment is the tendency of consciousness to move toward repetition of pleasurable experience. The object is secondary, the pattern is primary. The distinction is crucial because much contemporary confusion about love and freedom rests on misunderstanding this point. Many people believe that avoiding exclusivity proves non-attachment. They believe that refusing commitment demonstrates spiritual maturity. They do believe that maintaining multiple romantic involvements protects them from dependency. But if their choices are governed by the pursuit of stimulation, admiration, erotic novelty, or emotional intensity, then Raga is active. The object may change. The compulsion remains. Erich Fromm saw this pattern long before it became culturally fashionable. In The Art of Loving, he distinguishes between falling in love and standing in love. Falling in love, he writes, is characterized by sudden closeness between two strangers. The experience feels miraculous because it dissolves loneliness. Yet this dissolution is often sustained by projection and novelty. Standing in love, by contrast, requires discipline, knowledge, responsibility, and effort. Falling in love is fueled by pleasure. Standing in love is sustained by commitment. When the intensity of falling begins to soften, as it inevitably must, many interpret this as decline. Instead of deepening, they seek to restore intensity. This is where Raga becomes subtle. It disguises itself as authenticity. It says, I am simply following what feels alive. It says, I do not want to settle. It says, I refuse to be attached. But the sutra is an ambiguous attachment as following pleasure. The one who pursues novelty compulsively is attached to novelty. The one who seeks constant admiration is attached to admiration. The one who moves from partner to partner in order to maintain stimulation is not free from attachment. They are actually structured by it. Alain de Botton observes that romantic love in modern culture is burdened with impossible expectations. We expect a partner to provide metaphysical fulfillment, perpetual passion, emotional security, and existential meaning. When the ordinary rhythm of relationship replaces intensity, we experience disappointment. Rather than questioning expectation, we question the relationship. We interpret the fading of projection as proof that the bond was false. Carl Gustav Jung provides a framework that clarifies this dynamic. In early romantic attraction, we project unconscious aspects of ourselves onto the beloved. The beloved becomes carrier of the anima or animus. The intensity is real, but its source is internal. As projection withdraws, ordinariness returns. If we are unaware of projection, we interpret this as loss. The affair often becomes an attempt to restore projection. The new partner carries the ideal again. The thrill returns, the cycle repeats. Underneath the cycle is not liberation, but dependence on intensity. Patanjali does not condemn pleasure. He simply observes its powers to shape movement. Pleasure itself is not bondage. Bondage begins when pleasure dictates truth. When pleasure becomes authority, discernment collapses. Fromm writes that immature love says, I love you because I am loved. Mature love says, I am loved because I love. The first depends on external reinforcement, the second rests in internal stability. Raga thrives in the first. Bell hooks insist that love is an action rooted in care, commitment, knowledge, and responsibility. Without these elements, what we call love may simply be desire or need. Desire is natural, need is human, but neither equals freedom. Freedom requires the capacity to experience pleasure without being governed by it. In contemporary discourse, especially with certain spiritual subcultures, non-attachment is sometimes equated with relational minimalism. People claim that they're not attached because they refuse exclusivity or emotional depth. Yet often this refusal is structured by fear of losing pleasure or fear of discomfort. In such cases, raga and dvesha operate together. The person pursues pleasure in one direction while avoiding vulnerability in another. The affair dynamic illustrates this interplay vividly. An individual may justify parallel relationships by claiming they do not believe in possessiveness. They may describe themselves as emotionally autonomous. However, if they are unwilling to confront the consequences of their actions openly, and if they structure their life around maintaining pleasurable intensity while avoiding relational accountability, then the pattern actually reflects attachment. The attachment is not to a person, it is to stimulation. The Yoga Sutras place this in a larger psychological context. Earlier in Book 2, Patanjali described the Kleshas as rooted in avidya, misperception. If pleasure is mistaken for meaning, if intensity is mistaken for depth, if admiration is mistaken for identity, then the pursuit of pleasure becomes existential. The person does not merely want pleasure, they need it to stabilize the self. This is where raga becomes addictive. Fromm speaks on addiction not only in chemical terms, but in relational terms. The person who cannot tolerate solitude, who cannot tolerate ordinary phases of relationship, who cannot tolerate the absence of admiration, will seek stimulation compulsively. The mind begins to equate pleasure with aliveness. But pleasure is episodic. Love, by contrast, includes quiet phases. The ability to remain in quiet phases without seeking replacement stimulation is a mark of psychological maturity. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes the person established in steadiness, one whose mind is undisturbed in sorrow, who is free from craving and pleasure. Gita 2.56. Freedom and pleasure does not mean absence of pleasure. It means absence of craving. Vigata spra, free from thirst. The language anticipates vairagya, but here we are still within raga. The distinction is subtle yet decisive. To experience pleasure fully without clinging to its repetition requires awareness. Without awareness, pleasure leaves residue. The mind begins to seek its return. The residue becomes pattern. Václavic's systemic perspective illuminates how pleasure-seeking patterns become relationally reinforced. If one partner consistently provides novelty and the other provides stability, the dynamic becomes polarized. Each role intensifies. The novelty seeker becomes more restless. The stabilizer becomes more anxious. The system organizes around imbalance. In such systems, any reduction of stimulation is interpreted as decline. The deeper tragedy of raga is not moral failure, it is perceptual narrowing. When the mind is oriented toward pleasure, it becomes less sensitive to subtle forms of fulfillment. Ordinary affection, quiet companionship, shared responsibility, these lose value compared to intensity. The nervous system becomes calibrated to stimulation. Over time, what once felt sufficient no longer does. This is not unique to romantic life. It is visible in consumption, social media, achievement circles. Modern culture amplifies raga by constantly offering novelty. Yet, the Yoga Sutras do not advocate suppression. They advocate observation. When pleasure arises, observe it. When the urge to repeat arises, observe it. When dissatisfaction arises as intensity fades, observe it. In this observation, compulsion loosens. True freedom does not require rejecting pleasure. It requires seeing its impermanence clearly enough that one is not enslaved by its repetition. The person free from raga can commit without clinging. They can love deeply without demanding perpetual excitement. They can experience attraction without constructing identity around it. They can remain when the thrill softens. They can leave honestly when necessary without constructing narratives of superiority. In this way, raga is not destroyed. It is contextualized. Pleasure becomes part of life, not its master. In that shift, love begins to mature beyond projection and beyond addiction. This is the discipline hidden within a single line of Sanskrit. Attachment is that which follows pleasure. To see this clearly is already to loosen its grip. Dvesha, aversion, avoidance, and the architecture of withdrawal. After defining raga as the movement toward pleasure, Patanjali immediately presents its counterpart. Yoga Sutra 2.8 states, aversion is that which follows pain. If raga moves towards pleasure, dvesha moves away from pain. But just as raga is not merely liking something, dvesha is not merely disliking something. It is the structural recoil of the psyche from remembered discomfort. It is the imprint of pain that shapes future behavior. The Sanskrit again is exact. Anushai, resting upon, lying in the wake of. Pain leaves a residue. That residue conditions reaction. In Sankhya philosophy and psychology, impressions, samskaras, form grooves in consciousness. When experience of pain occurs, especially one connected to identity or attachment, the mind learns. It becomes vigilant. It anticipates repetition. It constructs strategies to avoid re-experiencing the hurt. Dvesha is not hatred. It is avoidance structured by memory. In relational life, this manifests in subtle and powerful ways. A person who once felt humiliated in confrontation may begin to avoid difficult conversations altogether. A person who experienced betrayal may withdraw emotionally from future intimacy. A person who felt engulfed in closeness may begin to protect distance rigidly. Outwardly, this can appear calm. Internally, it is fear operating in disguise. Paul Watzlawick communication theory provides a lens through which we can see how dvesha shapes entire relational systems. He famously argued that one cannot not communicate. Silence communicates. Withdrawal communicates. Avoidance communicates. When discomfort arises in relationship, one partner avoids addressing it. The system reorganizes around the silence. The other partner may intensify pursuit. The avoidant partner may withdraw further. A pattern that stabilizes. The original pain is not resolved. It is structured into behavior. Erich Fromm writes that mature love requires courage. To love means to risk disappointment, misunderstanding, and loss. Without courage, one retreats into strategies of self-protection. Dvesha often masquerades as rationality. It says, I simply do not want drama. It says, I prefer peace. It says, I am above emotional intensity. Yet, if the avoidance is driven by fear of discomfort, then the movement is not peace but recoil. The Bhagavad Gita describes the mind caught between attraction and aversion. Attachment and aversion are fixed in relation to the objects of the senses. One should not fall under their control, for they are obstacles. Notice the symmetry. Raga and dvesha are paired. Attraction and aversion are twin distortions. Where raga narrows perception towards what promises pleasure, dvesha narrows perception away from what threatens pain. In relationships, dvesha often shapes avoidance of necessary truth. Consider the dynamic of concealed dissatisfaction. One partner feels discontent but avoids expressing it to prevent conflict. Instead of speaking, they distance. Instead of confronting, they seek relief elsewhere. Instead of engaging, they detach internally. The avoidance is justified as protection. Yet concealment distorts reality. The partner who is not informed of dissatisfaction is deprived of agency. The relational field becomes asymmetrical. The avoidant partner protects themselves from discomfort while the other remains in ignorance. Watzlawick would describe this as a pathological communication pattern. The system becomes organized around non-discussion. The avoided topic gains power precisely because it is unspoken. Bell Hooks insists that love and truth are inseparable. Where truth is withheld to avoid discomfort, intimacy erodes. Avoidance does not preserve love, it gradually empties it. Carl Jung adds another dimension. What we refuse to confront internally often returns externally as projection. If I cannot acknowledge my own ambivalence around commitment, I may begin to experience my partner as oppressive. If I cannot admit my dissatisfaction, I may begin to perceive my partner as inadequate. Dvesha externalizes internal conflict. The more one avoids discomfort, the more discomfort accumulates in displaced form. The Yoga Sutras do not suggest suppressing pain. They suggest observing its imprint. If pain is met with awareness, its residue diminishes. If pain is met with avoidance, its residue hardens into aversion. The person governed by dvesha becomes structured around prevention. They design their life to minimize discomfort. Yet life inevitably produces discomfort. The strategy cannot succeed completely. Over time, the range of tolerable experience narrows. This narrowing is subtle. It may appear as preference. It may appear as clarity. It may even appear as maturity. But if the movement is driven by fear of re-experiencing pain, freedom is compromised. In the Gita, steadiness is described not as avoidance of sorrow, but as non-reactivity within it. It says, one whose mind is not shaken in sorrow. Dvesha shakes the mind. Freedom requires tolerance of discomfort without collapse. In relational practice, this means remaining in dialogue when dialogue is uncomfortable. It means telling the truth even when truth may destabilize admiration. It means listening to criticism without immediate defense. This does not mean accepting abuse. It does not mean remaining in harmful situations. It means distinguishing between necessary discomfort and actual harm. Dvesha conflates the two. When awareness deepens, one begins to notice the impulse to withdraw at the first sign of emotional heat. One begins to recognize how quickly the mind seeks escape. One begins to see the pattern of leaving conversations unresolved. And that recognition lies with the possibility of interruption. The person who interrupts Dvesha does not become fearless, they become courageous. Courage is not absence of fear, it is willingness to remain present in its presence. When Dvesha softens, conversation deepens. When conversation deepens, intimacy strengthens. When intimacy strengthens, fear of discomfort gradually decreases. And thus the oscillation between raga and dvesha begins to stabilize. But beneath both lies something even deeper. Thank you very much for listening, and we continue with the fifth klesha in the next podcast. So please leave a like and subscribe, and I hope I see you again here, and leave your comments and leave your questions. I'm curious to answer them. Thank you.